For Nancy Guthrie, the mother of Today Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, and investigators are busy with the painstaking work of forensic genealogy, trying to build a family tree from that mixed DNA found in her Tucson home that could lead to a suspect.
The FBI is now using advanced DNA technology to solve a disappearance caught on camera. In January 2026, Nancy Guthrie, the mother of Savannah Guthrie, vanished from her Tucson home after a masked man was seen outside her property in the early morning hours. With no suspect identified, investigators turned to investigative genetic genealogy, a powerful method that has solved cases once thought impossible. So what exactly happened the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared? And can this technology identify the person responsible before time runs out? Join us as we break down the investigation now racing toward answers. The night she disappeared. The Catalina Foothills is a quiet, affluent neighborhood on the northern edge of Tucson, the kind of place where the neighbors know each other well enough to notice when something is wrong. Nancy Guthrie had lived there for years. She had a routine and always attended virtual church services every Sunday with a friend. Her family was close, with her daughter Annie living only 4 miles away. And the rhythm of her life was the kind that produces the assumption of permanence. On the night of January 31st, everything about her life was ordinary. Dinner with Annie at Annie's house. Home by 9:45. And then, at some point between that drop-off and the following morning, an 84-year-old woman who had never given anyone a reason to fear for her safety simply vanished from her home in the middle of the night. And the security camera footage she left behind told a story that nobody in that neighborhood had been prepared to see. The doorbell camera footage that the FBI released to the public in early February shows a figure that raises every alarm the footage is capable of raising. A masked man wearing gloves, carrying an Ozark Trail backpack from Walmart, with a gun holster visible on his body, standing at the entrance to Nancy Guthrie's property in the early hours of February 1st. He wasn't moving with the hesitation of someone who is uncertain about what he is doing. He appeared calm while tampering with the camera deliberately. He knew it was there. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, watching that footage, noted the suspect's demeanor specifically. This was not someone improvising. This was someone who had planned. The FBI described the suspect as a male between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 10 inches tall, with an average build. Beyond the Walmart backpack and the holster, there were specific details about the clothing that investigators believed they could trace. The Pima County Sheriff's Department said Walmart provided records of all Ozark Trail hiker pack purchases from the preceding several months, and that surveillance footage from Walmart locations across the state was being reviewed. They were looking for the transaction. They were looking for the face behind the mask, captured somewhere before he put the mask on. They had not found it yet, but they had found something else. About 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, investigators found a pair of gloves. The gloves appeared to match the ones worn by the figure in the doorbell footage. DNA was collected from them. The analysis came back with a profile for an unknown male. The profile was submitted to CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, which contains nearly 27 million DNA profiles, including more than 19 million from people convicted of crimes. Unfortunately, there was no match. The man whose DNA was on those gloves had never given a DNA sample to law enforcement. He had never been arrested for a qualifying crime. He was not in the database. The trail that had looked promising for a week went cold. And then, in a development that would later be quietly embarrassing for the investigation's early momentum, the gloves were traced back to a local restaurant worker who had no connection to the case at all. Back to the evidence inside the house. The gloves were a dead end. But investigators had something else, something that the sheriff described with careful but unmistakable emphasis. DNA found inside Nancy Guthrie's home that did not belong to her, did not belong to anyone in her family, and did not belong to anyone who had a legitimate reason to be there. That DNA, if it belongs to the person who took her, is the key to everything. And extracting it is where the story gets complicated. So, how did they go about it? The DNA that may break the case. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos has been careful in his public statements about the DNA found inside Nancy Guthrie's home, threading the needle between keeping the investigation's momentum public enough to generate tips and not giving the suspect information that could help him stay hidden. But what he has said has been specific enough to understand the challenge. The DNA at the property is mixed. Not a single clean profile from a single person, but a combination of genetic material from multiple individuals that has been deposited on top of itself, contaminating and complicating the analysis in ways that require laboratory processing that simply takes time. Before investigators can run the DNA against any database, they have to separate the mixture into individual profiles, which requires work that the technology can do but cannot do instantly. The laboratory that received the samples reported challenges with the material. Nanos told reporters that the lab's scientists had expressed optimism that advancing technology would resolve the issues, but that the timeline was measured in weeks or months rather than days. That is a painful thing to say publicly when an 84-year-old woman has been missing for over a month, and the investigation's best physical evidence is sitting in a lab waiting to be readable. In the meantime, investigators were not waiting. They were pursuing the other path, investigative genetic genealogy, which does not require a match in a criminal database because it does not look in a criminal database at all. What investigators found at the home that does not belong there is the piece that genetic genealogist C.C. Moore, who has worked on some of the highest-profile IgG cases in American history, has described as the most significant element of the entire investigation. C.C. told NBC's Today show that if she were the suspect in this case, she would be genuinely alarmed right now. Not because the investigation has found him yet, but because of what the investigative genetic genealogy process is capable of doing with the material that may already be in custody. And the cases it has been used to crack give a very specific picture of exactly how capable that process is. To understand why investigators are betting on genetic genealogy to find Nancy Guthrie, you have to understand what the technology actually did to three of the most notorious criminals in modern American history. Because the story of how those cases got solved is the story of how this one might, what this technology has already done. Joseph James DeAngelo was a retired police officer living in a Sacramento suburb when investigators arrested him in April 2018 for crimes that had terrorized California for over a decade. The Golden State Killer had committed at least 13 murders and dozens of sexual misconduct across California between 1974 and 1986. And for 40 years, he had evaded identification, despite one of the most sustained investigative efforts in the history of American law enforcement. The break came not from CODIS, but from a genealogy database called GED Match, which is publicly accessible, and where users upload their DNA profiles to find relatives. Investigators uploaded the Golden State Killer's DNA profile, found distant relatives in the database, and built a family tree that narrowed the search until only one person fit. In 2020, DeAngelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of murder and admitted guilt to numerous additional crimes too old to prosecute. He was sentenced to life in prison. The Idaho murders case moved faster because the evidence was cleaner. On November 13, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students, Madison Mogan, Ethan Chapin, Zana Kernodle, and Kaylee Goncalves, were stabbed to death in their off-campus home. A K-bar knife sheath left at the crime scene contained DNA that CODIS could not match. The FBI sent the profile to Othram, a forensic genomics laboratory that uses next-generation sequencing to work with degraded or limited DNA samples. Othram ran the profile through genealogy databases, identified relatives, and built a family tree that led to Brian Kohberger, a criminology PhD student at Washington State University who had driven past the victim's home multiple times in the weeks before the murders. Investigators pulled a Q-tip from trash outside his parents' Pennsylvania home, matched it to the crime scene DNA through his father's genetic profile, and arrested Kohberger in December 2022, just 6 weeks after the murders. The speed of that identification, from crime to arrest in less than 2 months using IgG, is the benchmark that investigators in every subsequent high-profile case measure themselves against. In July 2025, Kohberger was sentenced to death. The Gilgo Beach case in New York followed the same template. Investigators used DNA evidence and genetic genealogy to identify Rex Heuermann, a Manhattan architect, as the suspect behind the murders of at least 4 women whose remains had been found on Long Island's Ocean Parkway more than a decade earlier. A pizza crust recovered from near his office provided the DNA that linked him to the crime scene. He was arrested in 2023. The pattern across all 3 cases is identical. CODIS finds nothing because the suspect is not in the database. IgG finds a relative because the suspect's family is in a public database, and the family tree does the rest. The question in the Nancy Guthrie case is whether the DNA is clean enough to run the process. The answer, as of mid-March 2026, is not yet known. But the investigation has not stalled. It has simply moved into a phase that is less visible from the outside, where laboratory work and database analysis are happening at the pace they happen, and where every other investigative thread is being pulled simultaneously. Every lead being pulled. The DNA is the centerpiece, but it is not the only thing investigators have. The FBI recovered additional images from security cameras at Nancy Guthrie's property covering the pool, the backyard, and the side yard. Though those images turned out to be thumbnails only, with no video footage recoverable. Investigators identified and then ruled out the glove DNA as belonging to the restaurant worker. 16 pairs of gloves were found in the area surrounding the house, most of which were traced back to members of the search teams. A car seen on Ring camera footage in the neighborhood at 2:36 in the morning of February 1st, approximately 2.5 miles from the house, was identified as a potential lead. As of mid-March, investigators had not been able to identify the vehicle. Nanos said they were looking at it alongside hundreds of thousands of other vehicles that were on the roads at that time of night. One of the more unusual investigative threads involves Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker. She has an implanted cardiac device that emits a Bluetooth signal detectable within approximately 218 yards. Investigators have been using search crews and helicopters equipped with Bluetooth detection technology to sweep the areas around her home and along potential routes out of the neighborhood, hoping to pick up that signal. President Trump, learning about the Bluetooth pacemaker search from news reports while aboard Air Force One, publicly criticized the decision to announce the tactic before using it, suggesting that the person who took her would take steps to prevent the signal from being found once they knew investigators were looking for it. Nanos and the FBI did not comment on that criticism. A man named Derek Colella was arrested in connection with a fake ransom demand he allegedly sent to the Guthrie family by text message days after the disappearance, claiming to be the abductor and demanding money. The demand was not credible, and investigators traced it to Colella's Los Angeles home through a Gmail account. he was released after a court appearance and charged separately. The real abductor, whoever he is, has not communicated publicly with the family or with investigators. Nanos has said the case is targeted rather than random, that investigators believe they know why Nancy Guthrie was taken, even if they cannot yet say so publicly, and that the suspect could strike again. The reward now stands at over $200,000 from law enforcement sources, with the Guthrie family offering an additional $1 million for information leading directly to Nancy's recovery. The tip line has received between 40,000 and 50,000 leads between the sheriff's office and the FBI since the disappearance. The Pima County Communications Center fielded more than 31,000 calls in the first 18 days of February 2026, compared to fewer than 21,000 in the same period of the prior year. Most of those calls are not actionable, and the dispatch manager has publicly asked callers to think carefully about whether their information is specific and credible before dialing. The volume itself is a sign of how much national attention this case has attracted. The identity of the victim's daughter has ensured that this case has never been treated as a local missing persons report, and the resources deployed reflect that. The FBI, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, and state law enforcement agencies are all actively involved in an investigation that Nanos has said will not be considered cold for as long as Nancy Guthrie has not been found. The technology that cracked the Golden State Killer and the Idaho murders is now running in a laboratory somewhere, working through the genetic material found inside Nancy Guthrie's home. Whether that material is clean enough to produce a workable profile, and whether that profile matches anyone in a genealogy database, is the question that the entire investigation has converged on. And the people who have worked with this technology before say the answer may already be closer than it appears from the outside. What the experts say is coming. C.C. Moore is one of the most experienced investigative genetic genealogists in the United States, with a career built on identifying unknown persons and suspects through the same database and family tree method that caught D'Angelo and Koberger. She starred in ABC's documentary series, The Genetic Detective, and has consulted on cases across the country. She has said publicly that if she were the suspect in this case, she would be very worried. Not because the investigation has a clean profile ready to run, but because of what the process can do with material that initially appears unusable. Cece told the Today Show that she would go back and re-swab parts of Nancy Guthrie's home looking for a rootless hair, a type of sample that many investigators historically passed over as insufficient, but that modern laboratory techniques can now process into a full viable profile. DNA, she noted, is hardier than most people understand. It survives on surfaces for a long time, even in a home that has been accessible to family members since the investigation began. The person who planned this crime carefully enough to wear gloves, wear a mask, and tamper with a doorbell camera still entered a home that was not his, breathed the air inside it, touched surfaces inside it, and left traces of himself that he could not fully control, no matter how carefully he had prepared. Barbara Ray Venter, the genealogist who worked on the D'Angelo case, has addressed the timeline question directly. Some cases resolve in hours when the suspect's relatives have uploaded substantial amounts of DNA data to public databases. Other cases take months or years if the family tree is thin or the database coverage is sparse. The Nancy Guthrie investigation is operating in real time, with a woman's life potentially depending on how quickly the laboratory can produce a workable profile and how quickly that profile can be matched to someone who shares enough genetic material with the suspect to build the tree. Ray Venter said the time pressure in active cases like this one is a genuinely different kind of challenge from the cold cases IGG was originally developed to solve. In a cold case, you are working backward through time, and a few extra weeks of laboratory work are a minor inconvenience. In an active abduction, they are not. The investigators on this case are not working in the dark. They have the full weight of recent history behind them, a track record of cases where the same technology found the same kind of suspect the same way. What they are working against is time, and the specific challenge of a DNA sample that is not yet ready to run. The laboratory processing is happening. The genetic genealogy analysis is underway on the material that is ready, and the investigation is running every other thread simultaneously. The backpack, the car on the ring footage, the pacemaker signal, the clothing, the tips, 40 to 50,000 of them, being reviewed one by one for credibility and actionability by trained investigators who are not waiting for the laboratory to produce an answer before pursuing everything else they have. The sheriff said on March 13th that he believes the case is targeted, that investigators understand the motive, even if they cannot say what it is, and that the suspect could strike again. That last detail is the one that makes the speed of the laboratory work feel most urgent. Wherever Nancy Guthrie is, and whatever the answer is when the genealogy analysis comes back, the person who took her is still out there. And the science that caught the Golden State Killer is looking for him. Do you think genetic genealogy will crack this case? And what do you think investigators are not yet saying publicly? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.